How many of you have heard of the term gentrification? It is to my understanding that many people may be familiar with the term. However, most do not fully understand the true complexity and gravity of this issue. I am here to clarify your understanding of this process and the implications it has on a neighborhood so that you may be aware of how gentrification perpetuates the inequality between the wealthy and the poor. Essentially, gentrification is the displacement of long-term residents in an urban setting, typically minorities from an economically lower class, by higher income persons through the renovation and improvement of the district so that it conforms to middle or upper class taste. I've recently become genuinely interested in this issue as I was searching for an apartment in my hometown in New York City and was shocked to see the unusually high cost of rent. So I searched in other areas such as Harlem and Bushwick that historically have always been considered the ghetto. Not only is the cost of rent excessively expensive, but most of the small businesses that made up these neighborhoods have been replaced in favor of corporate Starbucks or other trademark big businesses. Gentrification is an issue of policy that can be prevented. I stand here today to advise you all to petition against your state legislature to pass laws that will limit the manifestation of gentrification through the implementation of tenant protection laws, guaranteed rent stability, and inclusionary housing for low-income and long-term residents. In order to address the severity of this political dilemma, I will discuss three major consequences of gentrification. First, I will discuss inflated property values. Next, the alteration of the character and culture of the neighborhood. And lastly, the displacement of minority peoples. In an article titled "The Complex Link Between Gentrification and Displacement," Richard Florida discusses a 1983 study of 5 major cities in the United States: Boston, Cincinnati, Richmond, Seattle, and Denver, in which he concludes that nearly a quarter of residents in these neighborhoods were displaced due to eviction, increased rent, or housing turnover, which is the transfer of ownership from the house that they were renting. Comparably, a study conducted by Jacob Vigdor in 2001 shows evidence that gentrified areas in Boston were the result of an increase in housing turnover. With new landlords come new renovations, and thus a much higher cost of living as a result. So when higher income people move into these neighborhoods, it is done typically to capitalize on low property value, which eventually inflates the cost of living in the area and the cost of business as well. Those who cannot afford to live in these areas anymore are left with no other choice but to leave. Another aspect that occurs as a result of gentrification is the deprivation of culture. The culture of many of these neighborhoods is unique in character, and that is something that its residents take pride in. Many of the new businesses that are introduced to the area are generic trademark businesses. The housing renovations are all refurbished in a homogeneous manner to the point where neighboring towns are now indistinguishable from each other. Whereas before, each of these neighborhoods has a distinctive aspect about them that give it its own flavor. In New York City, neighborhood culture is very valued. Washington Heights is rich in Latin culture, which is evident when you go outside at 2 in the morning and can hear bachata music playing by a group of friends gathered around playing dominoes in front of their building. Arthur Avenue is considered the Little Italy of the Bronx, where you can find an Italian bakery on every corner. Then there's East Flatbush in Brooklyn, which holds a preservation of Jamaican and Caribbean culture that is evident during the block parties that are held during the summertime. Unfortunately, that culture is lost as a result of mass gentrification, leaving the locals feeling unfamiliar within the neighborhoods that they grew up in. As of May 23rd of this year, according to the DC Office of Planning website, the Creative Action Agenda was a study conducted to examine ways to support creative employment and business opportunities in Washington, DC. Accordingly, these documents consist of plans to establish new luxury apartments in the area in order to attract a specific group of people from a specific age range, race, profession, and income level. This became a major lawsuit between the local residents versus the DC Housing Authority. In her lawsuit, Ari Teresa, who is a civil rights lawyer and local resident on behalf of the people, stated about 39,000 Black residents have been forced out from the years 2000 to 2010, while the area gained approximately 50,000 white residents. Her claim caused outrage among the residents, which caused a temporary delay in the $400 million redevelopment plan of Berry Farm, DC, which happens to be one of the city's largest housing complexes. Similarly to many other cases of gentrification, minority groups seem to be the main target of displacement. It is highly discriminatory to push away one group of people in favor of another, whether that be for racial, classist, or financial reasons. Imagine calling a place your home your entire life, and then having to welcome strangers that appear all of a sudden. Instead of respecting and preserving your culture, they wash it away in favor of their own. This seems to be an issue we've had in our country since the indigenous people who willingly accept us into their land right before we forced our culture upon them and kicked them out of their own home. So please, I strongly urge you all to sign this petition to support our policy work that will protect local residents from the effects of gentrification.